of them. So some of them serious in nature because the endeavor of these meetings is for a beginner or a person who's in mid-career to draw lessons which can subsequently become handy as he goes on to develop his career. So that's the endeavor. Whatever mistakes you made might not have to be repeated as one goes down the career path. So in the evolutionary biology, there is a concept called as nature and nurture. Nature is what your genotype, nurture is what your phenotype becomes after multiple interactions. So, how was your early upbringing, and is the analytical mind of yours in dealing with complicated matters, be it medical or non-medical, is it a product of nature or nurture or both?
I would say it's a product of both. I had a very, very middle class upbringing with an extremely academic minded father. A person who inculcated the art of algorithmic thinking right from perhaps the sixth standard when we started solving our geometry riders together. In,
Mute yourself, please.
in this, so I grew up in this environment of things where till maybe the sixth or seventh standard, I was at the bottom half of the class. Somewhere around the seventh standard, something sparked and I started doing better, but was never really in the first five. I would be in the first 10. Somewhere after first year or inter science, as we used to have it then, I became a little more serious about what I was doing. But again, through medical school or even through MD pediatrics, I was never a candidate to fail, but I was never the guy to get the gold medal.
Okay. Sure. So you would say 50% nature, 50% nurture.
Truly so. And I must at this point say I'm not very sure whether I went into medicine because I wanted to do it or my father wanted me to do it.
Okay.
He was a salaried government employee who always, being a PhD in physics himself, but always against working for somebody, always wanting that you should be professional, self-employed. In those days, doctors used to have deep pockets compared to the corporate world.
Correct.
When I look back, perhaps, with my little instinct for numbers, digits, figures, maybe I would have done better in the banking industry. But who knows?
Correct. Very true. Very true. Any teacher, either during your schooling days or during your medical training, who inspired you and made you what you are today?
Oh, there were several of them. I can't pick any one single teacher. In school days, there were one or two names which strike out very clearly. Besides my father, who taught me physics and mathematics all through, who truly was a role model for me. But going forward in medical school, I had a pathology teacher, Dr. Bahal, followed by Dr. Iyer and Dr. Borges, the cardiology people who I did a house job with. And there is no way that I cannot express a debt of gratitude to Dr. R.P. Agarwal, who was my head of unit in pediatrics. To a fair extent, Dr. R.K. Anand, who taught me the art of communicating with patients. And by far and above, Dr. N.B. Kumta, who I revere as one of the sharpest clinicians that I have worked with while I was at Kasturba Hospital. And not only that, before that, I'd worked with him for 4 years in a tuberculosis research project. And last but not the least, after I joined Jaslo, a few years later, Dr. Amdekar and I embarked on a mission to write a textbook which would be a primer for pediatricians in office practice. And we spent 2 long years to write that book, which was about maybe 250 or 300 pages, creating an algorithmic approach to various symptoms. And I must say that it was one of the finest revisions of general pediatrics, as we used to sit over endless cups of tea between 7 and 10 in the morning, day on day for 2 years, and completed this book together. So it used to be invariably a sparring match with each of us disagreeing and finally coming to some compromise along the way. But finally, the book did see the light of the day. It was a great learning experience for me.
How was your early professional journey as a pediatrician? You must have graduated in the 80s, and it must have been a difficult time in South Mumbai with big stalwarts applying their trade. It must have been a difficult time for you, sir. And you didn't have Google reviews. You didn't have YouTube at that point of time. You didn't have any podcast which you could put across and show your skills. So how did it come about?
I was hired in a full-time job by a colleague of mine who was running a medical center. I lasted there for all of 1 year and we parted ways because we could not see eye to eye with each other, which is a more polite way of saying that I was thrown out. That was the time that I met Dr. Kumta, and there was a vacancy for a part-time research project, which was an ICMR-sponsored project. At the same time, I had helped a colleague, a senior colleague, Dr. Pradeep Mehta, to write and proofread his book on practical medicine and endocrinology, where the entire proofreading had been done by me. He introduced me to somebody to get a job on the noble amount of rupees 1,000 to proofread a medical journal. The ICMR project paid me rupees 1,200. So, and my wife was a lecturer at KEM Hospital in pathology. So we were extremely well-to-do by those days standards. And we had the benefit of taking the 7 Limited bus from Cuff Parade and riding together to work every day for 4 years. With the result, I did never have to worry about the fact that there was no food on the table. With this scenario, I had the afternoons and evenings free. And I started practice at a place called Worli Century Bazaar, which was a very low income area. And side by side, I started at Kem's Corner, which is a completely high income Sobo area. In the low income zone, I didn't have to wait too much because my Worli patient from the center where I was employed, I maintained a database with the address of every single patient I have seen from the first day. And that translates even to my rheumatology database today. My patients belong to me. They do not belong to the hospital where I work. So I recall when I parted ways with the center, every patient got a postcard with my new address. I had no waiting time. And I started seeing 1 or 2 or 3 patients every single day. At Kem's Corner, I used to solve the crossword and take the bus home. Till on the second or third day of my practice, a lady walked in with her baby who happened to be my classmate. And she said that I want you to look after my child. I said, are you sure? I'm 3 days in practice. She said, no, I'm okay with it. We are still in touch. That child is now nearing 40 and is a mother on her own right. They live in Australia. But practice picked up. And for the first 5 years, I had no hospital affiliation. I was just doing outpatient work, which was increasing progressively by clear word of mouth. It was an immunization practice. And I used to hospitalize patients under other consultants and just go and visit those patients, but not be in a decision-making process. It was not like these days where hospitals have 20 and 30 people of the same specialty on their rolls in Bombay. To get a hospital affiliation was a very, very prestigious affair, very guarded by coteries of people who had a hold on them. And it took me a good 5.5 years to pierce that ceiling and get a hospital affiliation.
It must have been a very difficult 4 or 5 years to get recognized. So, what prompted a specialization like pediatric pulmonology?
So, from 83 to 88, I had been doing the ICMR research project on short course chemotherapy of tuberculosis. This converted to a presentation which was accepted by the IUATLD at its World Conference for an oral presentation in Boston. In my very naive thinking in those days, I thought pulmonology was restricted to TB and asthma in India. And with that story, I thought that for 4 or 5 years, having seen so much of TB, I decided to present my work there and go for a 3-month training stint in pediatric pulmonology to a hospital where a friend of mine facilitated my stay and my stint over there with a team of pediatric pulmonologists. Somewhere I saw the writing on the wall that just doing general pediatrics in about 10 or 15 years is going to face headwinds, especially if you are in a metro city in the thick of all the action. I do not wish to state over here that general pediatrics has no role. I still strongly believe that it is general pediatrics that brought me here, and it is my exposure to general pediatrics that has helped my journey in rheumatology. But today, if you wish to practice general pediatrics in a tier 2 or a tier 3 town, you're good to go. If you're going to be practicing general pediatrics in a competitive environment like New Delhi, Bangalore, Bombay, and that too in an area where you're surrounded by 4 or 5 hospitals. I'm not saying you won't earn your income. You will earn your money for sure. There are enough kids. But somewhere your academic challenge will dry out. This was my belief then. And that's the reason I thought that pulmonology would be a good area to pursue at that point, and got in over there.
Then why did you change the hat again, sir? Why pediatric rheumatology? When you are doing very well as a pediatric pulmonologist, you are
I
brought.
won't say I was doing very well. I was doing reasonably. As you might be aware, the asthma training module and the asthma by consensus guidelines of the IAP, which still remain the longest uh, surviving action plans of the IAP, were kind of convened by me and largely authored by me. Having said that, I saw a bit of a ceiling in pulmonology for the reason that there is something even about the referrer's perception about how much he knows. And the general pediatrician, for him to refer a pulmonology case to you versus refer an endocrinology or a rheumatology case to you, the threshold is different because everybody thinks he can treat a cough and cold. Okay. Additionally, it involved bronchoscopies, which was the next evolutionary story. I'm horrible with my hands. My hand skills are questionable. And I have always had that story right from day one, that God forbid the patient if I become a surgeon. So I realized that there was a kind of a ceiling here, and it may take me time to really create a mark over here. So I had already started thinking in the mid-90s that somewhere I will have to do something different.
So there was this favorite movie series by Steven Spielberg, Back to the Future in 80s, when you were quite young. And
I'm sorry, I can't, I didn't hear you.
There was this favorite movie, there is one of my favorite movie series, Back to the Future. And I hope you have watched that series by Steven Spielberg, wonderful series. And if you had a time machine and you're Marty and you're transported back in time to 1987 from 2022, would you have done things differently?
I don't think so at all. Because I think I enjoyed my stint in pulmonology. You would not believe it, but I have protected time for rheumatology every single day from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. In the evening, I still potter around with general pediatrics, whatever old style it may be. But in my private office, still every evening, I see at least 2 children with a wheeze disorder or a pulmonary story. And that continues by word of mouth. So I would not regret my stint in pulmonology. If you think or believe that maybe had I gone into rheumatology 10 years earlier, what would have happened? I think I'm good where I am.
No, you're one of the founding fathers of pediatric rheumatology in India. Thoughts about how the birth of the subspecialty took place and about how you hosted the first national conference of pediatric rheumatology way back in 2003.
Before that, Anand, I might tell you as to what spurred me to pediatric rheumatology.
Right.
It was 3 seemingly unrelated incidents. In quick succession, I saw a child with hemophilia, a child with a post-dysenteric sacroiliitis, and a child with prolonged pyrexia and a pericardial rub, who I referred to Dr. V.R. Joshi, the noted doyen, thespian, call him what you want, of adult rheumatology, where in this last case I mentioned, he proposed a diagnosis of what used to be called Still's disease then. And I was remarkably struck by the dominantly clinical bedside nature of this specialty, where all these stories were suspected on the basis of history and history alone, and clinical examination. At the same time, I had a classmate, Dr. Nimish Nanavati, who's an adult rheumatologist. And I used to chat with him often. And I would always see that sense of satisfaction in his face about what he was doing and how he would work office hours and be home without too much of emergency work. And what sealed the story was, I'm sure all of you know Dr. Vaman Khadilkar, the endocrinologist.
Right.
Once upon a time, he used to be a resident of mine at Jaslo. We still stay in very good touch, and I have a great regard and respect for him as a clinician. He was visiting Bombay, and I can clearly remember that I had taken him for lunch to the club. And I was chatting with him and telling him that, Vaman, I feel that it's time for me to do a subspecialty. And I'm thinking in terms of a move over to endocrine or rheumatology or something that involves more of brain skills than hand skills. And he completely endorsed my decision. He was then training in endocrine in the UK. Shortly thereafter, I was visiting the UK, and I wrote with Dr. V.R. Joshi's recommendation to Professor Patricia Wu, who was then the head of department at Bosch. And I went and met her, asking her whether she would accept me to be there for 3 months or so. She said, I can't arrange funding. I managed to arrange funding over here. But that very year, my mother entered a phase of terminal breast cancer. So it looked as if it was a touch and go and that I would not be able to go for that. Peculiarly, she went into a quiet phase, and my wife and brother encouraged me to quickly go and take that trip and come back. I came back on the 14th of July. I can't forget that date. And on the 15th of July, Dr. Pavan Sureka, who is about 5 years senior to me at Nair Hospital,
Hello.
our alma mater,
हाँ बोलिए.
referred me
हाँ बोलिए.
the first case of rheumatology, a child with systemic GI. And after that, the journey began.
Very interesting, sir. And about NCPR, the first.
Right. So what I did recognize was that at that stage, they had started subspecialty chapters. There was a pulmonology chapter. There was various neurology, etc., all the major branches, neonatology, etc. There were separate chapters, but there was no rheumatology chapter. Now, it was a matter of strange coincidence, but the place where I practiced was located 7 floors above the IIP central office in the same building. And typically, whoever was the office bearers over there would try and drop in for a cup of tea or chat, or sometimes there would be some society related issues for which they would speak to me or consult me. And I remember Dr. Lokeshwar, the earlier president, once remarking that office bearers will come and go, but you will always stay on the top of IIP. But I do recall in one of these chats, speaking to the then office bearers that would there be a scope to create something which they had a second tier that they called a rheumatology interest group. So in this rheumatology interest group, they said that you will have to, it will not be a chapter, but it could be something where there are a bunch of people who are interested. So they used to have this publication called the Academy Today. And I put out an announcement in Academy Today saying that the plan is to start a rheumatology interest group. Would anybody be interested in this? Please write to me. And then I could take the story forward with the IIP. And to some extent, running down with papers and letters was relatively easy for me to do because I just had to take the elevator down. So, sure enough, the first email I got was from Dr. Surjit Singh saying that it would be a good idea. And then after that, I started getting a steady bunch of emails, and whoever looks at the serial number on that membership of ours will tell you who are the people who joined in the first batch, second batch, etc. Now, once this interest group was formed, obviously, it took a little while to galvanize the story. But then the next thought was that every chapter or every interest group has to have an annual meeting. So why don't we start with that? And therefore, we decided that let's have this annual meeting in Mumbai. So this annual meeting in Mumbai, we decided to hold at the Nehru Center. And at this meeting, basically, Dr. Pawan Sureka, Dr. Naresh Thakkar, Dr. Tahir Kagalwala, and there were two other Chupa Rustams who were involved. One of them who is probably in the audience today. Unbeknown to me, there was a little love affair in the bloom because Vijay and Rupa, Dr. Vijay Vishwanathan and Rupa, were integral in the planning and execution of this meeting. And that's perhaps the sylvan surroundings of Nehru Planetarium, or rather the Nehru Center, were a very good start point. We had a noble funding of rupees 2 lakhs, which we got from 4 or 5 or 6 sponsors, all of whom were friends, etc. There was no pharma company willing to stick its neck out to this fledgling society. And we managed to get 4 foreign faculty, of whom I knew only one, and he's the one who organized the other 3. And we managed to get Dr. Rolando Chimas, who unfortunately left us a few months ago, Angelo Ravelli, and Kevin Murray, who had been my mentor at Great Ormond Street. And we also roped in Sue Maillard, who was the chief physiotherapist at Great Ormond Street. That's how the story began. And very uniquely, I still have with me the booklet of the proceedings of the first conference, which we called Articulations in Pediatric Rheumatology. We created cases and questions at the end of cases, which went as approach to a single swollen joint and the causes of a single swollen joint, and started at that level. And we had about somewhere around, I can't recall, but about 90 to 100 delegates who came.
Very interesting story, sir. To take it up from the same thing which you pointed out, Cuttlebutt is that charge.
Anand, you're fading away in between.
Yeah, I would request people to mute their phones. You can just mute your phone, please. Thank you. A scuttlebutt is that you are very sharp in recognizing office romance stories. Is it due to Marathi Sindhi collaboration?
The Marathi Sindhi collaboration started even before medical college. However, my wife is a very stubborn woman, and it took me 7 years to convince her. But I think she still thinks she made a mistake.
Every wife thinks that they have been shortchanged, but I'm sure she made the right choice. So, anything which gives you a high apart from spirits?
Apart from?
Spirits. Your glass of whiskey.
You know what? Those who bark don't bite. Right? So while I may talk a lot about drinking, paradoxically, I seldom consume more than 30 ml on any given setting, never more than once in a month. So, जो गरजते हैं वो बरसते नहीं.
Anything else?
I mean, yeah. So other than spirits, according to me, the greatest high to me comes when I make a spectacular Eureka diagnosis. And this could be followed by a scenario where when I'm in class and I'm teaching somebody, and that may be even a class where there are just 4 people, or there are perhaps just my fellows sitting across me. But there's a point which I have illustrated or elicited that see the spark in their eyes. That is my absolute Eureka moment. Because somewhere down the line, again, maybe I don't want to, sound as if this is sort of complex, but I used to share that kind of relationship with my father. When he would teach me and I would crack the geometry rider and see the sense of satisfaction on his face, is the kind of sense that I get when there is that sense of realization or appreciation when there is a student sitting across, or a classroom, or a lecture that I'm delivering.
What would be your suggestions to young pediatricians and aspiring rheumatologists across the country who are just starting off? What are the say in office practice, because you have been in it for more than 4 decades. So what would your suggestions be? Maybe top 3 to 4 suggestions which will help them get to the right path.
So are you talking about pediatricians separately, or are you talking about existing pediatric rheumatologists, or what are you talking about?
Because we have a healthy mix of pediatricians and pediatric rheumatologists. Maybe you can talk to pediatric rheumatologists first and pediatricians later, because you have a great experience doing both.
Let me first start with those who are existingly practicing pediatric rheumatology. I would classify them into two groups. The first group would be those who are doing exclusive pediatric rheumatology, right? To them, carry on the good work with some other issues which I will talk about as common to those who are doing a mixed practice. To those who are doing a mixed practice, one thing for sure, maintain a schizophrenic attitude. Separate your general pediatrics from pediatric rheumatology at all costs and let not one dilute the other. Your colleagues, your peers will not recognize you or respect you if you see one cough and cold followed by one oligo-GI. It will not work. You have to protect time and preferably protect venue for what you do. You do pediatrics at another location, at another time, is a different story altogether. But definitely keep these two identities separate. Now, irrespective of whether you're doing pediatric rheumatology or you are a pediatrician with interest in rheumatology and you have protected time, record keeping of every single patient that you see is mandatory. In that, you have to have, as far as possible, we know that we all come with limitations in the Indian setting. Everybody brings a shopper's stock bag with even fixed deposit receipts and birth certificates in the same file. There's a limit as to how much you can extract from there. But recording photographs, recording histories, recording laboratory tests will help in a very long way going forward. Because otherwise, you will be accused by saying that private practice and marriage are the twin extinguishers of science. Okay? Do not put yourself to that story at all. Make sure that whatever data you have, you're not looking to be a Boston Children's Hospital or a Mass General or a teaching institution. Surely not. Those who are in teaching institutions, they have a different advantage and a different mindset. They are meant to be the beacons of science. But that does not mean that when you are in private practice, you have to abandon science completely. You can practice and you can have a reasonable academic background. And this is very, very crucial. Therefore, preserving records and preserving photographs and teaching your juniors and getting involved in a teaching program, whether it is having a fellowship. When you have a fellow under you, you have a moral obligation. That fellow is going to carry your torch and your flag and go to the country. And I remember you and I had several off-the-line discussions when you were contemplating starting a fellowship in Bangalore. Right? What started as 2 fellowships now, Priyankar has one, you have one. I'm sure Suma of course, has a DM program with adult rheumatologists, etc. But when that fellow asks you a question which you cannot answer, you damn well go home and read.
Very true.
So these would be the story. For those who are plain pediatricians, I would say to them, especially if they are in tier 2 towns, rheumatology and endocrinology represent two absolute greenfield areas where they can acquire their skills and become small nodes. I would give you the classic example of a gentleman by the name of Dr. Mahesh Kore. Okay, he practices in this small village called Nipani. I'm sorry, I'm calling it a village, but by Bombay standard, it's a small town. And that man has no formal training. He attends conferences, he reads petty vigorously, he's attended my online course, and he has developed a small little node or a hub there, wherein he gets referrals from even Kolhapur coming to him. Right? So to say that it is not possible is not in my dictionary. If Mahesh can do it, others can do it. There are several who can do it. And I would say that currently, if there are 24,000 IIP members, what am I looking? I am looking at 0.5% of them, which means 100 to follow this path. And I would say even if 50 followed this path, which is 0.25%, and they are in tier 2 towns, a generic Amravati, generic, I'm just talking about, a generic Vishakhapatnam, a generic Raipur, okay? It can make a world of difference according to me.
Understand. So another concept which comes in to us who have been practicing is a work-life balance. What's your take on work-life balance for a busy pediatrician, a pediatric rheumatologist?
I think I should be the last to comment on this. Because if you want me to comment on work-life imbalance, I'm the right guy to talk. Till at least 2 or 3 months ago. Okay? I think till maybe 2021 or 20, I would say I've led one of the most imbalanced lives in terms of doing any fun activity, right? Always chasing deadlines, always chasing targets, never saying no to anything, whether it be organizing this, doing that, often at the cost of personal equanimity, at the cost of not being entirely physically fit, at the cost of not planning personal finances sensibly, in spite of the fact that a branch like rheumatology gave me a lot of time. And my phone doesn't ring in the night ever. My phone doesn't ring at home, seldom rings. But that partly because of the fortification that I've created with this small team that I have built. And all the 3 people who I work with right now, Archana and my 2 fellows, Nazia and Anushka, are that first wall of defense. But even then, I think there were too many pies in which I had my finger, which is something that I've realized over the last 2 or 3 months, and I'm trying to hold back.
I understand. Because
I would certainly say one thing, that after your rheumatology practice, everybody in their maybe early or mid 40s, everyone, irrespective of whether he's a pediatrician, general pediatrician, or anybody, has to protect time to do a bit of financial planning. And if you ask me, what is your regret? You remember you asked me earlier, what is your regret? My regret is not to be a sensible financial planner in the 80s and 90s, when there was a fair amount of cash flow, but there was no hisab, no kitab, which changed over the last decade, I would say, or 8 or 10 years. And peculiarly there, I have to say the child is the father of man. And both my kids are in the financial sector. And a fair amount of financial literacy I owe to them.
Very interesting, sir. So that my next question was, apart from work-life balance, what would you suggest? And you did suggest simple steps for financial literacy, apart from, say, reading a financial newspaper, which you always do, say, read Economic Times. What other things can be done? Because we as doctors are very poor at financial planning. We only realize late in life that our money doesn't work for us, and we need to continue to work till we die, like what Warren Buffett mentioned. Because if our money doesn't work for us, so what are the steps they can take?
I think the first most important step is the realization step. And to stop kicking the can. Right? Okay, I'm still 40, this will happen. Dr. Khubchandani said it. Okay. And anyway, next month I have to go to Prague, so I need 2 lakhs for my Prague trip. So forget it, I'll see when I come back. Okay. 3 years later, I have to pay my daughter's fees. How do I do it? Okay. So there has to be a disciplined planning for this story. A fair amount of extrapolation is required. You have to start by also doing some little bit of theory reading. Today, you said that you sat and read Ross Petty's book on pediatric rheumatology. Damn good. Very good. It helped you to make your next diagnosis. Correct? What's the harm in reading some basic books on finance, which help you to understand the economic times better? Okay. There's a book by Ben Graham called The Intelligent Investor. There's another very prolific writer called Peter Lynch. Peter Lynch and Ben Graham. Peter Lynch is even on YouTube with multiple short stories. His book hardly costs 200-300 rupees. It's on Amazon Kindle. Okay. Don't read it like a textbook, like you would read a Ross Petty. But there's no harm in understanding when they talk about what is your return on investment, what is inflation, what is a bonus share, what is a right share, what is a mutual fund, what is the ETF. That much financial literacy has to start somewhere. And most often you meet somebody at a party and you ask him and he says, oh, I don't understand any of this. This is beyond me. And they're proud to say it. And I must say that I fall in that basket maybe 20 years ago. Today, I would feel ashamed to say that. Okay. And therefore, if you really look, understand that when we started practice in 1982, my fee was rupees 50. If you go by the story that your money should double every 5 years, by now my fee should be roughly about 8,000 or 7,000 for a consult. It's not even 50% of that, which is something how much we undersell ourselves. And we are invariably underselling ourselves because we are fearsome that we will lose the patient to competition because he will charge less. Surgical specialties don't do that. So to some extent, it's your own story. And we have to also face another major headwind. Those days of cash income are gone, which doctors used to have. Today, everybody wants a receipt. Everybody wants Google Pay. Hospital-based practice all comes through check money. And in a way, it's a very sensible, good, progressive thing that has happened. But those people who belong to the old generation, who were happy to have some degree of unaccounted money, are feeling the pinch because it's a transition. It's like a menopause for them. But somewhere along the way, your earning check money can give you disciplined SIP investing. And whenever you do SIP investing, if you're doing it in a mutual fund, read sites yourself, think carefully, form a little think tank amongst 2 or 3 people who you know, who are conservatives, who are not traders, who buy on at 9 in the morning and sell at 7 in the evening. You do not belong to that category. We don't have the time to do that. You are an investor and you're looking at a 6-year story, not a 6-day story. And talk to each other, create a club. According to me, the Pediatric Rheumatology Society should have informal meetings even on finance. And there you're not meeting as a rheumatology society, you're creating a small informal group of your own where you talk. And money is not a bad 5-letter word to talk about. At the end of the day, we always say that it is one more person going to work from your family.
Very interesting thoughts. Very interesting thoughts. Now, how do you foresee pediatric rheumatology in decades to come with advances in genetics and immunology now? Previously, it used to be a clinical specialty. Now you yourself have been doing a lot of publications. You have had quite a few cases of data too, which you have published. So how do you foresee it going forward? Vis-a-vis 20 years ago to 20 years forward now?
When they use the word personalized medicine, that's what I see. What I see is people like you, Suma, Mahesh, Sagar Bhattar, just naming. Please do not take this as a exclusive, all-inclusive, but list, but examples that I'm citing. That 8 years or 5 years or maybe 10 years down the line, you will have sub-branched out. Okay? And that you will start saying that my personal interest is in JI. Or my personal, or Mahesh will say that I like to see children with localized scleroderma, and for them I'm going to protect more time. Sagar said I'm going to see only PIDs in my practice. Okay. Vijay starts saying that I'm going to be the post Kawasaki care guy. And some degree of subspecialization starts coming. Genetics, which I have seen coming down from 75,000 to now 12 and 13,000, will become a 6,000 rupee game. But at one peril, in their need to compete with each other at the cost of prices coming down, quality will take a hit. Bioinformatics people will be well sought after, but with the volumes that they will have to receive, with costs being reduced and awareness of the importance of genetic diagnosis increasing, quality is likely to take a hit, and interpreting some of the genetic results is something that we will have to be very careful about. I'm already facing those scenarios in day-to-day practice, realizing it because my total number of hereditary autoinflammatory diseases is definitely past. Maybe I'm just shooting a number, it may be 5 or 10 plus or minus, but I'm looking at about 65 or 70 cases right now. Okay, shooting a number. And I would say that on an average, there are at least 3 or 4 patients a week in whom I am asking for genetic testing. Time and again, I'm returning with reports where the phenotype doesn't match. And once in a way, when I ask for a reappraisal, we get back a different report. What happens to the meek clinician who refers it and then purely believes the report that he receives is a source of worry and a note of caution that I would like to share with everybody in this group who has started asking for genetic studies.
Thank you, sir. So, when you finally decide to hang up your boots, if you do, how would you like to be remembered? What should your legacy be in the field of pediatric rheumatology?
I would say meticulous, a sound planner, a good communicator, clinically reasonably adept, but very frank and outspoken, which often has led to several people perhaps misunderstanding me or disliking me.
And are there any regrets in life?
I knew that you would be asking me this question because today when I was sipping my coffee at about 6:30 p.m. before I went for my shower, I said, what is Anand going to ask me today? And I knew that there will be this question, are there any regrets in your life? And at a macro level, not really. I think I'm very well traveled, more than 50 countries perhaps. And I've taught pretty well, I've done well in practice and achieved my professional goals very satisfactorily. I hope to be a little more careful about how I plan my next few years because I want to be like bridge dose steroid therapy. that is better low and long rather than high and short, like I was last year. And probably continue to work at a smaller pace, but for a longer period rather than burn myself out very soon. Want to indulge more in teaching endeavors and concentrate and focus a little more on financial planning, which, as I said, should have actually started some more years ago.
Sure. So it was a very comprehensive interview. Thank you so much, sir. Before we conclude, we will have a mock OPD, and we'll have in Gita what used to be called as Uvacha, Sandeep Uvacha. So same what Dr. Raju Khubchandani would say, what are his unique quotes. And to begin with, Vijay, you're there?
Yeah, I'm very much there. And Anand, at the risk of taking that extra 10 or 15 seconds, I had the privilege of probably being Sir's second or third DNB student. And invariably, one thing I used to dread was 24 hours in the PICU. And come Monday morning, I literally used to run away because there used to be Sir carrying a 5 or 10 kg file from Interland Aurangabad and say, Vijay, come and chart this. We will discuss this in the afternoon. And that's how the learning started, because I, after a heavy PICU duty, used to chart all the cases, history, investigation chart with my own hands. And it was a unique way of learning, I thought, because you would be in sync with what's happening despite your limitations. And then come afternoon, all of us used to be in the OPD. And the first thing was his hands would go into his pocket and get out some money and call for Ram Babu, who used to be a helper, and say, Ram Babu, chai, coffee, or khari biscuit lekar aana. And lo behold, everything would have been sorted. All the tiredness disappeared. And I still remember the first thing was addressing residents or fellows or consultants as human beings. And one liner that I remember distinctly is, Chetna, I think he is a confused mass of protoplasm, is what I remember very distinctly, how well he used to describe human beings or Homo sapiens. Chetna, what else do you remember?
Uh, a lot, but continuing with those peculiar one-liners of Sir. Um, Sir would say, I think this guy thinks that the sun rises out of his eight dot dot dot. What say, Prajakta? Are you there?
Jodi, are you there? Would you like to say something about it, Jodi?
Yes, of course. He seems to be running like a headless chicken with no idea whatsoever what is happening. Arey, somebody call him.
Prajakta?
No, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I will go and fly the kite then. So, the unique one-liners from Dr. Chandani, and I think whoever comes in connect with him are pre-Rajulized. The personality is so huge, and I think I have to give credit to all these people on the stage, and apart from them, I'll also have to thank Archana, Divya, and lot many others who gave more insights into Dr. Raju Khubchandani's life, and it has helped us have this fine interview. And I think we all carry home a lot of baggage, which we can take it forward and make it very useful, very constructive in our lives. Thank you, sir, for spending your Saturday evening with us. It was a pleasure having you with us on Heart to Heart. And thank you, and wish you a very healthy life in future, and hope to interact with you very soon.
Anand, I don't know how much to thank all of you here, and I was so delighted to see Vijay, Jyoti, Chetna, Divya, Anushka, and so many others in this story. And Abhay Shivpuri, I remember Abhay extremely well. And Abhay is one person who might not have very good memories of me, but I do hope he doesn't hold any more grudges against me. And I have really enjoyed this evening. Hi, Abhay. And I can't tell you how much this has meant to me qualitatively to spend this evening with you here. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Have a great-
Raju,
Thank you.
Raju,
Yes,
I'm just going to use my exclusive card to ask you one final question. And
sure.
that is, how would you like to see the society come up in the coming years? What do you see the future for the society, Pediatric Rheumatology Society India?
I am looking at both a qualitative and a quantitative growth. Right now, notwithstanding the fact that on the rolls you may have maybe 300 members, I'm just speculating. But realistically, we know very much that the true workhorses, or the ones who are really truly involved in protected time in pediatric rheumatology, are still possibly maybe 35 or 40 and not more than that. And I feel that this is now the time for mitotic division, wherein it has to be that each one teach one. And today, therefore, I think out of these 30 or 35 workhorses who are there, if even 15 or 20 of them are able to have one person train under them, in 2 years, you will have doubled the workforce. And in 3 years, you will have, in 4 years, you will have quadrupled the workforce. If this workforce increases, your number of performing members increase. And as your performing members increase, your membership of 300 doesn't mean anything when you have non-performing assets of 250. Okay? But those performing assets have to increase. These people just become members at the pit of the moment when there is a local national conference, they are all made to enroll. Correct? And you have to target, like today now, Vijay in Jupiter can very well start a fellowship. You know, Mahesh over there, etc. And there should be no shame to get money from somewhere to sponsor a fellow. Even if it is an NGO who's willing to give you money. So long as the person is able to keep body and soul together, you will not have difficulty in finding somebody to study rheumatology. You should also perhaps think of centralizing the admission process. It should not be that I am hiring my own guy and you're hiring your own guy. Let them be a match kind of a system. And our goal should be that every capital city in a state should have at least one rheumatologist. Okay. So that then if you have, and then you have other major metro cities, like you have a Baroda, Surat, etc., which are also not small places, right? But you should look at doubling the workforce, and this will not in any way create competition. Right now, what is happening? In Bangalore, there are 8 people.
9.
How does, maybe 9, how does it work? Right? On the other hand, you have a place like Raipur or Bhubaneswar or somewhere else where there is nobody at all. Then you have a major hub in Chandigarh. And then you have poor Sagar running from town to town, and then you talk about work-life balance. How does he run from town to town? But he has to go because there's nobody else going there. So this is something where you should create during the NCPR a separate strategy meeting or a separate financial planning meeting where some people can be called. Okay. Also, a very important incentive for people is when they are given a chance to speak on the stage. Correct? I think it's time where, when there is a national conference, that people like us can be made to chair a session or discuss a case or something and move on in life. Right? Which will not be taken as a slur. Those after dinner speeches, etc., can be accorded to us. But you'd rather give that to 4 other juniors to have a roundtable discussion, maybe. They read, they get fired that, oh, somebody gave me the privilege of the platform. Why not? So I do hope that the Bangalore conference will take this as a suggestion and have a separate session on financial planning or have a separate session on strategies, not for personal growth, but strategies for growth of pediatric rheumatology in India.
Absolutely, sir. That is a very important point. Very important. I think, yeah, Anand, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So thank you so much for spending the evening with us. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Anand.
It was indeed a great pleasure. And we hope to have many more of these. Thank you so much. And a great evening to all of you. Thank you. Bye.